This is a shortened version of the original slide program that traced the history of where the traditional model of education came from. This is kind of a summary of where I think we should be right now from COVID, but also these were issues that existed way before COVID with the traditional model. So this is a summary of where we could go from here. If you want to learn more about where the history of the traditional model of education came from, which is 400 years old, please watch the first slideshow I presented. It's about an hour or so, and I discuss that in some detail. It is extremely important that educators understand where the traditional model of education came from. I've been kind of disheartened by how few educators have asked the question, why do we educate the way we do? Why do we lock kids into a room all day? Why do we make them sit all day? Why do the desks have to be in tight little rows? We just have accepted this model, and I know that the disciplinary problems with our kids have reached, if you will, epidemic levels because I see it. I see it almost every day. I have been in the schools now for about 5 years. I've probably been in 300 classrooms, and this is a problem educational wide. This is a huge problem. The kids hate this educational model, and they may not know they're rebelling against it, but they are. They don't like having to, they don't see the logic behind the model anymore. They don't understand why they have to learn inside a box, sit in a chair all day, be on a box all day. So the disciplinary problems that I feel are absolutely out of control right now, and the reason why I'm posting these slideshows and the reason why I'm trying to raise awareness, because we're losing good teachers, is because we're still sticking to this model like glue, and it's a terrible model, and I just can't for the life of me understand why we're still using it. So if you want to see the history of where this traditional prison model of education came from, watch the slideshow I have on this specifically, and it looks into the history. This is a summary of some of the lessons we've learned after COVID, but we also knew this before COVID. This is the legal stuff I have to read. Thank you for watching this slideshow and considering its ideas. This slideshow is the property of Ecological Outreach Services, EOS. It cannot be duplicated, sold, copied, or otherwise poached. Please use the proper citation as Virginia Moran, Ecological Outreach Services. There's my website, Grass Valley, California. For 2021 was when I first posted this, but I have since made some updates. Thank you. I want you to share this slideshow. Please share it as widely as possible. All I ask is that it is properly cited if you use the information from it, and that meets my legal requirements as well. Thank you so much. To derive the greatest benefit of this short presentation, please consider watching the full presentation first. Again, it's about an hour or so long. It traces the history. I present a new model of education. It's a pretty packed presentation, honestly. So I recommend you watch that one first before you watch this summary presentation. And thanks for that. So what we have learned from COVID so far, this is a little bit deceptive because we've always known that the existing traditional model of education is inadequate for all parties involved. And so it says COVID, but we've known about this way before COVID. But COVID has brought these problems with the traditional approach to education to light in a major way. So monotony is monotony. Monotony is unbearable for children and adults. Monotony does not equal learning. Traditional education model was based on control and convenience, meaning packing all the kids into a room, making them sit all day, controlling their every movement. Thus the analogy, or actually it's not an analogy, the similarity to a prison environment, that isn't changing, and it should be. Learning ceases when monotony takes over, triggering a chain of negative problems. I see this constantly, and it is painful. It is so painful for me to go into the schools now and see this play out on a daily basis. And it's basically that the kids today don't understand the logic of our educational approach. And whether they know it or not, they're rebelling against it, in some cases in a very almost violent way. And it's burning everyone out and is causing our teachers to leave the profession. And we have to take some kind of different approach. I don't think all these kids are disciplinary problems, quote unquote. They don't have, quote, disciplinary issues, quote unquote. I just think they can't stand this model of education, and they see through it, and they know that they need something different. Growing children should not be sitting all day, whether in a classroom or behind a screen. We're in this crazy situation where we're sending kids back to school and then they sit all day on their computers. So we're really like locked into this whole box thing. You know, we've got to box the kids into a room, and we box them into their chair, and then we chain them to their computers, and we just can't seem to get away from this approach. Traditional public education institutions must consider new models of educating versus education that meet the needs of all. These new models must be flexible. They must include movement. They must include the community. And last we checked, joy is still legal. So there's so little joy in the classroom. It's almost like, and I do get into this in the original slide program, but it's almost like joy is disallowed in the schools. You can't have a child actually experience joy in the learning environment. It is extremely rare. And if you see a child starting to experience joy, and when I see it, on the rare occasions they're allowed to go outside, which includes pretty much just recess, it's usually a spontaneous experience. It's usually outside, and it's usually shut down immediately. Lots of examples, but my examples are the 10-year-old that sees a bug on the playground, and they all huddle around and look at this bug. Now, you would think we would want to encourage that kind of curiosity. They're already experiencing joy, but this is how dysfunctional the system is. It shuts them down almost immediately. It's like all the adults get terrified that these children are gathered around looking at this bug, or they're looking at a cloud, or they're looking up at the tree. That is shut down. I see it every single day. I have seen it for years. That as soon as a student, from a small child to a high school student, starts to look up into the sky, or looks around them, or makes some kind of observation, it is shut down. It scares the adults. And in that process, we are also shutting down the joy of learning. And let me tell you, there is no joy in learning using the current traditional model of education. Our kids are startlingly non-empathetic, have absolutely no sense of gratitude. They are cruel. They are unhappy. We all understand what's going on. We all understand the rebellion, but I can't stand it anymore. How many times have I heard this from teachers? This is just one. This is why they're leaving the profession. So what may be the best model? It must be based on child physiology and psychology. You cannot have a one-size-fits-all educational model. That's oppressive, and there's no joy in it. And completely ignores where the child is physiologically and psychologically. The learning techniques for a 6-year-old are completely different from the learning techniques for a 16-year-old, yet we use the same exact model. Put them in the classroom. Make them sit in the chairs. Make them sit for hours at a time. Don't let them go outside. It's the same model. It is a cruel model. It is, in my opinion, the model that we use to educate our children right now is cruel. Making growing children who need to move and be active sit all day and now sit behind a screen and call that education is an act of cruelty. We cannot continue to have our children sit all day, not allow them to move except maybe they get 15 minutes of recess. We are messing our kids up with this model, and I see it every single day, and it's very, very painful to watch. I can't remember the last time I was in a classroom where there wasn't some conflict between a child wanting to move, get up, move around the room, get out of the room, and the teacher insisting that the child remain seated. That overwhelms everything else in the learning environment still after 400 years. Please look at that slideshow I developed on how old this model is. It has nothing to do with what's best for children. It's about control and convenience for adults. So we need these different approaches. They have to be based on the physiology of where the child is. For example, we all know 7th graders. They are exploding out of their skins. Their hormones have kicked in. All of a sudden, they have a body that is 6'2", but their brains are still 13 years old. They don't know how to manage the changes in their body and their physiology. They don't know how to deal with one another psychologically. We have to have a kind of curriculum that is sensitive to where these children are in their growth phases, in their mental development. It's, again, very painful for me to see what's going on in all these schools, and it's not good. And that's why I am asking you as a legislator or as a citizen to watch this show and please take actions. And I would love to see the professional educational community, of which there are thousands of education bureaucrats, start slipping into these rooms and observing what is going on. Yesterday I was in a classroom, again very painful for me to watch, in which the students, 6th grade, couldn't handle it anymore. They wanted to get up and move around the room, and they got in trouble for being themselves. They're basically being themselves. And they got into a conflict with the teacher. The teacher had to ask a bunch of them to leave. She was on the verge of tears. I asked her, how often does this happen? And she said, every day. Every day. Where are you, educational system? Where are you, legislators? Go into the classrooms and watch this happening. The learning should revolve around universal high standards using SLOs. What are SLOs? SLOs are student learning outcomes. They're used in the colleges. And what they are endpoints that a college instructor needs to get to by the end of the semester. By the end of the semester, the student will be able to name the stages of photosynthesis. The student will be able to identify the differences between an amphibian and a reptile. Whatever they are, those are the endpoints for the instructor to strive for. How they do that is up to them as far as using their talent, their passion, their creativity. This is why so many teachers I know want to teach on the college level, because they can use their talent and passion and creativity. You cannot do that if someone drops a curriculum binder in your lap and tells you, you have to follow this box. God, we just love our boxes in this educational approach. All the schools should use SLOs, which means that if a student needs to learn the endpoints, the teacher can decide how to teach. Therein introducing creativity into the teaching environment, which is what teachers love. They want to be creative. They want to use different methods for their students. But if you have them locked to their binders, they cannot do this. This is where monotony comes in, lack of joy, and this is when they leave their profession. So throw out the curriculum binders. Give all the teachers endpoints. Here's what we want them to learn, and then let them figure out, based on the above point and their age and the physiology, and based on knowing their own students, what methods would work the best. So student learning outcomes should be used in all the schools Tell the teachers this is what we want them to know by the end of the trimester. How you do it, have at it, have fun, be creative. Let them experience joy in the learning environment. Let me tell you, that's not at all what's going on right now. Compulsory attendance, not a fan. I'm not a fan at all. But I do believe that compulsory attendance should be used for the littles, generally K through 6. However, just because they have to attend school doesn't mean they have to do the monotonous prison traditional educational model. They have to come to school, but maybe they can come to school from 10 until 3. And then you can use whatever creative approaches you want once they're at school. But because they're little, they actually should have more of a compulsory attendance criteria for their safety. The college campus model is the best one for 7 and 12 older students, or what's often called the hybrid model. The campus is open from maybe 7 to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The students have a math class. They go in and they write up their schedules. They have an algebra class from 1 to 3. That gives mom the flexibility to work that day. Maybe from 8 to noon she has to work, and then she can take her child to the algebra class. Maybe there's a field trip afterwards. There is some online learning. Every single tool that is available is used to educate our students, but allowing for flexibility for the parents and the schedule. So it's the campus model or college model is what we should be using for junior high and high school level students. Field trips on a regular basis. Get them out into the community service on a regular basis. Performances on a regular basis. Art, music, comedy, poetry readings, music, band, you name it. This is all part of the regular curriculum, and if the curriculum is flexible, if the teaching approach is flexible, then you can have these kinds of events all the time. I want to give an example of a 9th grade teacher I know here who took her students, it was hard, but she managed to do it, to a public hearing. She took her students to a local public hearing. The students were able to prepare their own statements. So what did they get out of this? They got a field trip. They got to go out into the real community, the community we cut them off from. They got to participate in the democratic process. A lot of boxes checked on this. It was one of the most memorable experiences of their lives. So the other thing that we do with the traditional model of education, which frankly I think is creepy, is we work really, really, really hard to cut our kids off from the world around them. They are not allowed to participate or even pay attention to the world around them. And then we wonder why they haven't developed empathy. Why don't they have any sense of gratitude? One of the most striking examples for me is when it snows. When it snows, of course, the kids run to the window and they want to look at the snow, or they want to go outside and be in the snow. We have a system that cuts them off from any sensory experience whatsoever. So the kids are told to sit back in their chairs and ignore the snow. Ignore what's going on around them in their community. I think it's creepy. I think it's unhealthy, and it creates in them a kind of dissociative disorder where it gives them permission to ignore what's going on in the world around them. And you can't develop empathy if you don't integrate the world around them and what's into their day-to-day lives. So I'm really concerned by the fact, again, the illustration of the kids standing around a beetle, and they're getting in trouble for it. The kids not being allowed to look at the snow as it's falling. It shouldn't be a teachable moment, as we call it. It should be the entire approach for teaching. Consider ditching the binders. We love our binders. Curriculum is a multi-million or billion-dollar business. The community can and should be the curriculum. So the boundary between education and the community is fluid. What kind of society does not allow every child to reach their highest potential? Maybe it isn't possible if we continue to put the model above what is best for growing children. which is what we're currently doing. So, a couple kids running down a country road, a beautiful day. They're out in nature, they're in the environment, they're happy, they're free, and they're experiencing, some joy. This is what we should strive for. This is what will make them more interested in learning. This is the positive association they will have with the world around them. So I hope that you take some of these ideas forward. I really appreciate your time and watching both my slide programs, and stay well. Thanks again.